Was there anything else, Sam?
Yeah, we're good. Ready to go?
All right, it's your turn.
All right. I did want to mention, oh, krigiana, so cute. So Discover Life has been having issues, and it's basically all about denial of service from robots that want to grab every piece of information. They have maybe hundreds of thousands of pictures there too. So I think that's part of it. Anyway, Pick is struggling, and it may be that ultimately we have to go to a subscription-based access, which would be free, but you know, it it blocks a lot of people just because then you can't really find it. Anyway, that's just wanted to give you a heads up. He restarts everything every hour. So if it doesn't work at some point, it should work in a little bit. Top of the hour would be the best to look at it. And so we'll try and keep everyone up to date. So we were talking the last few weeks about Callandrena, and we were working on the females, and now we'll delve into the males. I thought it would be good since last week we were talking about krigiana and rudbeckiae and simplex and placata to tackle those in reverse order, and then we'll get to asteris and asteroides and whatever else is in there that I'm now forgetting that are in Callandrena that we have specimens for. So if we go, let's see, I'll share my screen now. Okay, that should have done it. And we will go to, well, we'll just start with krigiana. So if you remember, it's a specialist on krigia, so a little tiny aster ACE thing related to chicory and that crowd that blooms sort of early summer, I would say, maybe late spring, and really likes dry areas that are appear to be poor in poor soils of different kind. So it's around. It's on the scheme of things in Callandrena scheme of things. It's small, and the males have a couple interesting features to watch out for, in addition to the general dullness and banding of the specimens. Um, let's see. I think I have some wording here to cover that we put together. So a lot of times we have hints and information that we've distilled from several places in this on the species page. So it's always worth scrolling to there. It's on the list to make that better organized because it's just been catch as catch can. And then, of course, a lot of you know that we try to grab whatever literature is around. And so, for example, in the LaBerge et al. Group has covered all the Andrena in the East at least, but mostly in the West too. And you can read how they talk about it. And then similarly, you can get into the gory details, and using Mitchell's characterization is in there too. Here we got Mitchell. So there's quite a bit of information. And again, when you're struggling with, is it this thing or that thing, that's a place to look because there should be high quality descriptions of what the species is you're looking at. Okay, so with krigiana, the vibe is not a shiny little dark black bee, but a brownish bee with lighter brown areas that are in stripes. I'm trying to get to the microscope view. And so we're going to go to the microscope view. A thing about the male that's interesting is a lot of times you'll see kind of this. So here's the clypeus. There's the suture lines that define the clypeal edges. But in the middle, there's a smudgy yellow portion. So you can see there's quite a big dark gap. And this smudge can be quite a bit smaller. I think I have some examples. If we have time, we could look at them. And then it can be completely absent. So when you see something like this, your krigiana alert system in the East should go off because there's not many things that have partial yellow. You know, in other words, usually they fill up. There are some, but this should be a hint. Another thing that this species has that's interesting, sorry about that red line. was playing around with things and it came on and I can't figure out at the moment how to take it off, but I can move it. But we have a nice cursor, so we really don't need this. I'm going to up the light here so we can see the antennae better. The antennae are also pretty interesting. And let me focus here for a second. Let's do 200. That's pretty good. And so when we look at the antennae, overall, that antennae is pretty short. It's basically like a female antennae. You can see there. It may even be slightly shorter than the female, which is unusual. Males as a whole, even in Andrena, which tends not to have exorbitantly long antennae, I'm going to move this a little bit so we can see the flagellar segments a little bit better. But in general, a male would have longer antennae than the female. But this is not really the case here. There's other examples. I think of Lazy-glossum pectoralis. And I'm at the highest power, so we can jack this up a little bit. But here is, so scape pencil is not in view, but is right there. And then here's F1. Okay, and F2 is incredibly short. I think I am going to add some more light so we can see this better, because it's unusually short compared to other species. And so F1 basically equals F2, 3, and 4 added together. Let's see if we can look at that. Again, pretty unusual. There's a character that talks about that too. So it is in the wheelhouse. And so when you start gaining a little more experience looking at bees, you want to look for, I'm going to go to the other side here because I can. And maybe that shows it a little bit better. At this magnification, things are difficult, and optically, it's not quite what we want to see. Okay, so this should be here. Again, not sure it's showing up great, but this should be the suture line. F1's down that way. Then F2, F3, and F4 are relatively short little segments, and together they equal, it's not a little hard to see these boundaries here, but basically they're the same length as F1, which is an unusual characteristic. So short antennal segments, particularly those F2 and so forth, which under other circumstances are roughly equal. These are clearly the length down the antennae is much shorter than the width. Okay, let's look at the vibration of the species.
Hey, Sam. So you normally have this shared in a full screen. Right now we're seeing it kind of zoomed with like a bunch of other screen behind it, like the white screen. Can you make it full screen?
Yeah, I thought I did.
Yeah, the appearance is
I'm
different than
hitting.
usual.
I know. I see that too. Let me go back to the normal screen. So there's the normal screen right here.
Yeah, we
And
see that
normally I
normally.
do, yeah. So first of all, this is good because I'm going to take this back down to 100, let's say. And I'm going to take off the labels because they become distractingly too white. There we go. Yeah. So I'll do what I normally do, and I don't know if in my messing around I have changed something, and if anyone knows anything about this program. But when I do my normal get large thing, for whatever reason, it doesn't fill the whole screen like it usually does. What if I do zoom? Oh, it does weirdly a spot zoom. That's interesting. How about an auto? What does that mean? Mm, 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 mm. Okay. Oh, that's the, sorry, that was actually the Zoom session that is controlling that. I don't think I can see anything on here. Let me go back in. I can zoom in with my cursor. Maybe that will help. Let's do that. And now do, that might have been it. So there we go. It seemed to be some kind of manual zoom. All right, we'll leave it at that. We can return maybe after class. So we have like males basically provide a same character as a female, but a weakened reflection of that. And so you can see usually. And so you can see here, unless there's something that the male really wants to have on its body. But in this particular case, you can see that um, the surface sculpturing has that look of different layers of brown rather than layers of black, although that looks pretty dark. But these lighter amber rims are pretty distinctive. And I'm going to shift to a different specimen just to show you that a little bit more. This one was from Pennsylvania. And this one, I think, has a completely dark clipius. Yeah, so we can start with that. In this Callandrena group, the amount of yellow or lack of yellow, usually there's yellow in the clipius. So here we have a clipius turnip that is completely dark. Same critter though. And you can see maybe a little bit better here. Can we zoom that? Look at that, zooming in digitally. You can see maybe a little bit better than the last one. F1, 2, 3, 4, all these are really, really skinny. Usually, almost none of these appear to be longer than wide. So normally the antennal segments define, they're all the same number, but they define the length of the overall antennae, and these are all stubby and short. That should be something that would alert you to this particular species. So just want to show you the back, and then we'll go to the other rudbeckiae and then simplex and dupla. You can see by the pen size how small this is. Okay, this is digitally enlarged versus using the microscope. So the microscope will give us a little bit better definition. Again, you can see a relatively dull, meaning there's inscribed lines throughout thorax and abdomen, and these abdomen has a browner color overall rather than a black color, and then the amber rims, and it's not completely obvious here, but they do have what the females have in a more reduced form, these bands of hair. Females have it quite a bit stronger than that. All right, so let's move to so cool little bee and get its label back on. And we'll go to rudbeckiae, which is in the same subgenus, but big. At least of the ones we've been looking at, this is the biggest. So this is another one that has varying amounts of yellow on the face. In this case, it does sort of the opposite. Almost always is yellow on the clipius, but a lot of time, but not always, there is, and this can be quite reduced to just spots, which is sometimes you have to pay attention when you're looking, can't always assume that if you see this, this amount of yellow, that all of it is on the clypeus. So here's the clypeus, and here on the edge, through the hair, should be able to see that here's a clypeal edge. This is the paraocular area, so the area between the eye and the clypeus, and that's yellow right there. That can be gone, or it can be very much reduced in size. So additionally, it's a big B. When we look at the antennal segment, we don't see that extreme, even though it's the same subgenus, we don't see that extreme differentiation that we did with the others. These are shortish. I think that curves over. Here's F1 to about there, F2, 3, 4. These three are longer than F1, which is one of the characters we look for, is the relative length of F1 to the other antennal segments. And you can see like this one right here, we're approaching square. In other words, the width and the length are about the same. And the other antennal segments are angling, so we may not quite be seeing a complete picture there. I will angle it, because why not? So yeah, you can see that in comparison now to the krigiana, here you have antennal segments towards the end, actually from as far back as we can see, really, these are longer than they are wide, and everything was just the opposite. In other words, the width was greater than the length on the krigiana. So this is more typical within range. And now a slightly dusty specimen, but you can even see right from this level. So I'm at my lowest power. It's already big. You can see the pin, and you can kind of see the dullness and lack of light reflecting off the sputum. And when we look, so this is a male, so it tends to, again, be less obvious than the female. But here's a abdomen that very much looks like the female's abdomen. Just almost no real light. You know, there's light reflecting, but it's not like you can see the light bulb in it, and it certainly is not mirror-like. And when you zoom in, you see it is just like a mass of pitting and inscribed lines, and you can't see anything much going on in there. And it's just a very textured, rough look. So, like I mentioned with the female, that's sort of a vibe, pretty dark wings too, that almost, if after looking at a bunch of these kinds of things, you can almost immediately detect that that's that's rudbeckiae. So looking at that face, those yellow markings, and the darkened wings, let's see, and the fact that you're probably collecting it off of black-eyed Susan, echinacea, that sort of thing. Let's take a look and see what we have here for wording in the species page. Another aspect is that even if it is working, discovery life often can be very slow. So here is a male. They do this yellowish color is often typical. It's not showing up in the bright fluorescent lights. So again, here's that yellow. Here's a little marking of yellow in the bottom of the paraocular area right there. So this tends to be what's visible. This is there, but often covered by hair. So again, it just takes a little bit of time to peer into those sorts of things. You can see it in, it's probably Mitchell's drawings too. So let's see if we say the females noted, we know that males are similar to females, but have a yellow clypeus, quite similar to Beameri helianthiformis. I believe we have, I don't have it up here with me yet. It's in the annex, but I think we have helianthus and helianthiformis males. So we'll take a look at next time. Anyway, those have similar, they're big, both Helianthiformis and Helianthus are big, hunky bees. Femeri is something we don't see, but it's possible we have that. And yeah, so in contrast, Helianthus forms by the clearer wings, so we notice the dark brown wings. And okay, well, actually, in contrast to Helianthiformis is right, has very dark wings, has clearer wings in Adulclipius, whereas Helianthiformis has very much dark wings and Clipius is shiny. Okay, so that I think helps define the rudbeckiae specimen for us in the male. We can take a quick look by going to has here. Let's see if there's any additional information in the guide proper. But these kinds of things tend to key, both those tend to key up very nicely with the existing. So we'll just do back. So rudbeckiae is 1 out of 1. So there's no individual character that's addressing rudbeckiae. Let's look at krigiana. And the same thing, krigiana is only showing up once, so there's no, it just keys out nicely with those kinds of characters that we covered. All right, so moving on to more of what we did on the last session, which was simplex and placata. Let's see, I have not looked here. Let's see if I do have these. I have less of a fewer of these specimens, but I think I do. Okay, so here's placata, and this is a good example, right? So here's placata, and in general, I think of placata as just having a solid yellow clipius. Tends to be more of a off-white compared to particularly rudbeckiae. But it is a small bee, just you're never going to associate it with rudbeckiae just based on size. But this has, interestingly, just a touch of yellow. So it officially falls into that classification of yellow in the clipius and yellow in the paraocular area. I'm going to twist it just a little bit so you can see this. It's very subtle. And I believe I'd have to look that we should have scored it for having this, because in general, you're going to see this. So it'd be scored. That's the thing about Discover Life, is you can score it for multiple characters, multiple states of a character. So here we have the character would be the amount of yellow on the clipius. So sometimes we have none, and sometimes we have clipius entirely yellow and paraocular area dark. And sometimes we have clipius yellow and some yellow, like this little smudge there in the paraocular area. This is the kind of thing that really has to be watched out for. So sometimes you see that in different species. And every once in a while, so in a situation like this, it would be good to be conservative, to score it for both with and without a yellow in the paraocular area. Because if you look at enough specimens of any species, Hylaeus is a good example, where you're using the presence of the yellow markings or light markings on like the pronotal lobe or the pronotal collar and a couple other places. Every once in a while, they're just not there, or they're so reduced that you question whether they're there or not. So all these color markings are subject to disappearing. And you get into Nemata and it really becomes that way. Okay, so taking a look here, you can see this generally white look, and simplex is going to look very much almost exactly the same as this one. Whether they have smudges or not, I'm not quite sure. But when we look in the guide here, we should see a placata. So we're looking at placata right now. So we have 7 characters or 7 times that that word shows up, which means there's a lot going on. So I don't know if I'll have time, but I have asteroides and asteris specimens here too, but they need to be thought about at least. So here's asteroides, and we're looking at flagellar segments equal to or slightly longer than the second and shorter than the third. So we're comparing that first one, lengths and in placata. We'll check this out. So first flagellomere, longer than the second, and at least as long as the third. So let's take a look at that. And antennae are just really useful for some of these species that have many other characters not present. All right. So we have a out of focus antennae. We're going to change the orientation on. I can get it back in to where it belongs. It's the tip, and it should be there. Shouldn't try to do this at high focus. So now, focusing. Okay, no, again, even though this species is as small as krigiana, these are longer. When you look at them in comparison to the females, you can say, oh, well, that looks like a male because the antennae are longer. So these segments are longer than they are wide. We, though, are interested in the first segments. We have to change the orientation here to get a good, yeah, we're too much at an angle. So let's see, I want to bend this direction and straight down. Better. Okay. I'm going to bump up the, well, there's some, just, this is good. There's some goop on this. So we have F1, and we will look at what's going on. So F1 is certainly longer than F2. And it is also, unless I'm missing something, longer than F3, I would say. Let's see what it says here. So F1 longer than second, check, and at least as long. So that also checks because it is greater than, in my opinion, as the third. Okay, good. So if we're looking at asteroides, which we can later, the F1 equal or only slightly longer than F2. We didn't have any, there's no problem in discriminating whether that was longer or shorter, and shorter than third. So a very different set of ratios. All right, what else we got here for placata versus other things? So here's the placata versus simplex. So this is another place where sometimes it's very difficult to determine the separation points for these very similar species. And sometimes it turns out later they're not even different species, but let's pretend that they are. I think that's probably true. So placata versus simplex. So in placata, the third F3 distinctly longer than F2. Let's see what we got. So 1, 2, 3, F2. I would say F3 is longer than F2. Distinctly, you know, it's longer. I don't know about distinct. Okay, longer than 2. Then we'll go into this too, tergum to midlines. Okay, in simplex, F3 is about as long as F2. So about as long versus distinctly, that's not a real great character. But in this case, I'd say I have no problem declaring this longer than that. Not potentially about the same. So nothing is exactly the same, right? So it's going to be in the ballpark of about the same. Okay, so those characters are not as nice. Now, we might as well spend some time here because we have to go back and determine this one versus simplex, which is next. And so, and Claire, you'll have to keep track of time. I don't have a watch here.
Yep, you're just at 30. You're good.
Third. Okay, all right, great. T2, midline, smooth. Remember this from last time, right? The amount of smoothness and shininess versus tessellation or demarcation by small inscribed microscopic lines, making it dull, reflecting less light. So T2 midline, so right down the middle of T2, smooth and shiny except at base. And then the alternative for simplex, which we'll look at, T2 midline at least weakly tessellate throughout. Okay, so let's see what we got here. That's not a, again, those are the only two characters separating these tricky ones out that are in the guide, at least. Be nice to find additional ones. But oh, my abdomen just came right off here. I'm going to search for another specimen, or we have to deal with gluing on, which is impractical. Darn it. That's the problem with snapping. Let's see, what am I going to do here? I'm going to put it into the box. Maybe I can very carefully get it onto this black piece of clay. I think again. So we can still look at it and then I'll repair it later. Those who are into the nuance of taking care of specimens, this happens all the time. We don't try and glue it back to the specimen. What my preference is, and a lot of people have this similar preference, is you glue it either to the label. Look at how incredibly gross that surface is. Or you glue it to another piece of, archival paper, a point or whatever, and put it back onto the pin. All right, so we need some more light. I'll just say, here's the process. Get some glue, either dip a pin into the glue bottle or put some glue on your thumbnail or some other place and dip a tip of a pin into it so there's a fair amount of glue on it. Transfer that glue to the label so there is a good amount of glue on there, and then you take the pin and with your other fingers you pull lightly down the pin once. So there's just a film of glue now on the pin. And so with that film of glue, you then can very gently touch the very dry and very light piece of B that has fallen off, and it will attach to the pin. And then you go over to the label where there's that bigger chunk of glue, and you, place it on the glue, that glue on the paper spot in the orientation that you want, and you should be able to very lightly pull the pin away, and the the piece of the B will stay in that pool of glue. People have different ways of doing this, so feel free to put your notes into the chat. Okay, I'm going to up the lighting. And let's do 300 maybe. This is a very dark. So this is, when we were comparing both krigiana and rudbeckiae, excuse me, when we're looking at this specimen, it was not this dark, right? So it's just another vibe. So here's bright white, very solid, strong. These are males, right? So it's not necessarily the case that you would see this. Very strong and solid. White hairs, not completely across, and the background is almost completely black, maybe completely black. And there's none of this light brown amber rim thing going on. So a different vibe. Now we want to look at T2. We're going to look at the midline, and we're going to look for shininess. We may still need to jack up probably the light. It's so dark, that's what we're not seeing much, but orienting F1, F2, this is the area midline that we're looking at, and we don't see much of anything, which is sort of in keeping with the notion that it would be smooth and shiny and bright. I'm going to do one more increase in lighting, and then we'll play with the scancing of the light. Let's see if you can see anything. Let's do 500. Well, let's do 600. What the heck? Living large. Okay, so still, even at this higher light level, which is blowing out the white of the things, and now I'm putting it way up. I really don't, there's nothing going on that surface that I can tell. I'm going to move the light more to the side, which often picks up surface sculpturing. And indeed, oh, there's an interesting view. So there's maybe a little, I'm not even sure. Oh, it's reflecting off my thumb. So you can see a little bit here. Oh, interesting. There's some rippling, but not really obvious microstructure there, which when we do simplex, which we're going to do next, there would. All right, you poor little specimen. We'll take care of you after class. And carefully put that away. All right, let's look at simplex. So let me find a nice male. Okay, and this on clay. And I'm going to look at, orient a little bit different. Look at the this. That way. Get this in focus. All right. This little male. We have very, I'm going to zoom it way up because we have a lot of light going down on this specimen. I think I'm going to jump right. We'll come back to the antennae. Well, maybe the amount of light will be good here, but you, first of all, you don't see this is very clear demarcation of the edge of the clip because there's no little smudgy mark there, which there also can be exactly that same thing in placata. All right, so we had an antennal difference here with placata. Let's just try and orient this. And a triite difference. Not sure I want this exact orientation, but it might be okay. Okay, we may have to change things a little bit in terms of focus. All right. F1, 2, 3. You can already sense that these 2 and 3 are not as long overall as long, but we're looking at ratios. And oh wait, or maybe I made a mistake. Maybe this is F1 and that was a line that was not meant to be a line. I think that's true. I'm gonna then spin this just a little bit. We can look at the other side too. One side doesn't work, the other often does. Okay. Ooh, I'm moving and there's a lag. Okay, so let's look at this again. Of two minds here. Like, is that the border, the boundary between F1 and F2, or is that F, is this all F1? I am not 100% sure, and I'm at my max here. Let's go. So let's just talk about this for 1 second. Well, we have it. we have some focus things going on. We could use maybe even more light. So anyway, we want to better see these. I'm gonna just try. Oh wait, you know what? Let's just stick the light source up closer. How about that? Now we're talking about blowing this out. All right, let's just take a look here at the definition. So this indeed would be the boundary. 1, 2, 3. I think we'll just leave it with lots of light at the moment, and then I'll take it down a notch. But let's see what we say here. So simplex F3 about as long as F2. So 1, 2, 3, F3. But that might be pick. Hang on for 1 second. Let's see what. Pick, you're live. You're live, but things are working. What's going on? Yeah. Yeah, we're working right now. We appreciate you. Okay. All right. All right. See you, pick. Okay. So F3 and F2 should be about the same. We'll look at the other side too, but one could make that case. I would say, though, that I could also argue, so about the same is problematic because that's never exact. It's never, nature is never like, these are exactly the same size. So that versus that, I could go either way. And if I had to guess which one would be longer, it would be F3. So if we go back here and look, F3 longer than F2 in placata. So that puts us in a dangerous territory. When we looked at the placata one, though, that was very clearly the case. So let's go look at the other antennae as an alternative here and see if we get the same. I'm going to take down the light a bit.
Sam, I'm going to check in. I stepped away for a second to hear some craziness on the Doug Burgum address. Are you got simplex up?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's what I thought.
We can talk craziness later. Yeah. I could say things, but I get in trouble. Okay. So we have basically the same story with less light there, but let's take this down and find the other antenna. We may still want to have less light. Try to get the antenna oriented so that we can look at the ratios. I think I still need to bend this over some more. How about like that? Might be better. Okie dokie. Oops, I should not touch the specimen while I'm trying to orient and focus it, and it's this delicate. All right, so a little bit of the same problem here.
We're
That's
also
escape.
seeing,
There's a
Sam, that you have
pedestal.
a reminder that Luna's going to call for an interview. You have an Outlook
Oh,
reminder on your
yeah,
screen.
right. Yeah, 2 hours overdue. I've been in correspondence. We're punting to tomorrow or Friday. Um, okay. Ooh, which reminded me, you can remind me too, Claire. I have to hire a different student. Okay, for Anacostia. All
Heard
right,
ya.
so F1, well, actually F1 isn't in play. Well, we do have to play, if that's the border, then, but we were playing with F2 and F3. And now I'm just having problems. seeing the boundaries. I see a boundary here and a boundary here, and probably that's the boundary. So this is F2, this is F3. That's about equal. Let's take one last shot at this. Well, actually, no, let's go back. Let me play with the lighting by just moving the lighting. Somewhat simpler. So one, try and define the edges of the antennae a little bit better. I'm still thinking this is F2 and SF3. And in this particular view, F3 is a little bit shorter than F2. Or is, yeah, boy, I'm having some problems here. Or is this F3 and that F2, and this is the boundary with F1 to the pedestal there? Just have some extra sculpturing. I think this is a lot clearer when you're not doing it online. Anyway, I don't see a whole lot of things here in this particular one. And I'm going to move on to the abdomen that would make me think that we're looking at segments that are incredibly different in the size range, like their lengths are pretty close. All right, so now looking at the tergites, actually I could take it offline. All right, so first thing to notice is all of a sudden you see, remember when we were looking at placata, we were really having some hard time seeing anything that looked like surface sculpture. And there was some rippling once we played around with the lighting a little bit. But if you look here, you can see that the tessellations, the microscopic sculpturing very clearly, very, very defined on this one compared to the other. So we, I think, can be satisfied that that is indeed simplex by the combination of characters. And that's how it goes a lot of times. So particularly, problematic when you're using keys is that you have to make, with particularly dichotomous keys, you have to make decisions based on, does it have this one thing or doesn't it have that one thing? And sometimes the closer you get to another species, but sometimes when you're trying to divide out large numbers of species, that becomes more tricky to make that call. Anyway, so at the end, you might reverse engineer using Discover Life or your other keys and see if you come up with the same thing looking at some of these comparisons between species and looking at the key characters. Over time, we may develop cheat sheets for all the bee species, so that would have the nominally shortest number of characters that would clearly define that species, so that that would act as your double check, because it's hard to get specimens these days. How are we doing on time, Claire?
10 minutos. 10, yeah, yep, 10. Sorry, I'm like
okay.
half
Right.
listening.
Let's
Sorry.
play a little bit then with asterisk. Sorry, what did you say? Have I been
All
fired?
good, sir.
Is
You
that
can
what
keep it going.
All right. All right. So let's look at asteris and asteroides. So these are, in general, and it's a relatively good character to think about. These are larger than, but similar to simplex and placata. They tend to be yellower, and you'll see this in this specimen unless the lighting is messing us up, which could. They tend to be under more natural lighting. A yellower, and this specimen certainly is, but you just can't really see it here. Yellower, and here again we have that tricky Callandrena pattern of not playing around completely with. So I'll just move the lights. That's actually much more effective and faster than playing around with internal lighting. So there we go. Again, very different
Asteris
bee.
or oides?
This is asteris. So you can see the clypeus. You can see a nice line, in this case, between the clypeus and this yellow lower paraoculars yellow mark. And this is more towards yellow than a off-white, as you see in simplex and things. So, and the measurements come out and are very helpful when we look at that. So let's jump to the guide here, and we're just going to play around with the has because we already know that what the ballpark is. So, and we're a nuanced group, asterisk. So, oh, we only have one. So asterisk must key out nicely. So, because we only have asteroides versus placata. Um, so let's take a look at this specimen, and I'm not sure what we have here that makes asterisk key out so nicely. So the combination of a larger size, looking at the antennal segments, which we'll look at together. And we see that's a pretty generic set of antennal segments. Oh, we have, well, I didn't look at the others, but we'll do a quick run through the guides. But see, so if we use the guides now and try and ask them questions, we'll say Maryland just for convenience because I happen to be in Maryland. And so another thing is that these are all late season ones. What's the actual date? So that eliminates a lot of things. This is September, actually late September. Well, mid-September. So again, that's going to, you can see 152 specimens are for September, but in March and April, you're in 300. So we're already going to knock out with just the state and the region a whole bunch of specimens from our list. And I'm not sure what I do. Let's take a look at size. Size is reasonably big. And we're going to say that we're at 11 millimeters. And so you can see over there, 33 kinds with just 2 questions answered. Now we should be down further. And it might take a second because of our friends bots who are making better AI for everybody. So 22 now, and when we go down here, we have both the clypeus and the paraoculary have some yellow. So that should also help in terms of knocking it down. So we're down to 5 at this point. So what do we got? Except that was one that we looked at. I didn't pull any specimens today. Asteris asteroides, fulvipennis, rudbeckiae. So we are in Callandrena with those sets of characters. So I want to say that vertex height. I'm not going to show vertex height because you know how to do that. And so we're going to say that it is 1.5 roughly. And so it's more than 1 to 1.5 and more than 1.5 to 2 because there is no exactly 1.5. So we're bracketing and we'll see if that helps with anything. Well, it's thinking. I believe it's thinking. Yeah, there we go. And we're down to 3. So we could, let me just look at labral process and see. Within this group, you have things that are strongly bidentate and things that are not. So this one has very clear to almost pointed. Wow, I wonder if it is. Pointed is a dangerous one. So a lot of times if I'm doing pointed, I'm going to see it says neither. I'm going to do both bidentate and pointed. So it didn't give us anything. So I'm going to just go jump to the separation of those three by hitting simplify. And just going to scroll through here. So I'm going to go down to the bottom. So here we have some nice flagellar segment things, and you can see that these are only that one has two. So these are separating out some stuff. So let's take a look. So if I look at this specimen, try not to snap off its antennae, what are we looking at? F1 versus the others, and how many additional segments. So I've got F1. It is definitely longer than two, longer than the second, but not as long as second. Okay, shorter than second flagellum, about as long. No, longer than the second, but not as long, as long or longer. Okay, so that's going to give us two. And then we can do another round. So it's just thinking, unless I didn't search and thought I did. So now we're with asteris and rudbeckiae, and the vibe on the back end of asteris is different. So we don't have all that tessellation and whatnot going on there at the same look. But did I hit simplify? I don't know. Let's take a look now at what's left that helps separate out those two. So I'm skipping things that I don't think are going to help a whole lot or just ambiguous and things I don't like, right? So these have, so I'm looking for something that's all ones that really like all this. So here we go, head clippius surface texture between pits. So we have dull, shiny in the center and shiny throughout. What do we got? And well, we certainly have shiny in the middle. I'm not absolutely sure that there's not. Let's see what happens when we do shiny. So a lot of this is hypothesis testing, right? So got shiny, and it is asteris, but what if I do shiny and dulled at the edges? So that's a very common state, and it's still asteris. So that gives me a lot of confidence that it's not rudbeckiae. And I could also pull out both specimens, right? So T2, pale apical hair bands. This is usually pretty solid character. So I'm looking at T2 and it's broken. So there's not a line. It's hard to tell whether it's narrow or broad. So doing two, we have a chance that it's something else besides. So it could be they're both scored for the one of those. But we're back to asteris. So that builds up even more wings membrane color, darker at the apex, pale tan, and pale, darker, slightly darker at apex beyond venation. Let's see what we got here. And we have a pretty darn pale all round. Okay, so pale tan throughout. And oh,
Coming
so
up
one
on
of
time,
these
buddy.
is we're on a wrap here.
Wrap
Is that what
it.
you're saying? Okay.
I mean, you and I
All
have
right.
time, but we're hitting the hour.
Okay. All right. So I think a little more investigation, but I've got two strong characters there that keyed out nicely, and the other was ambiguous that I thought would be good, but was not. And so I think we can say that was asteris. And then I think next time we'll do asteroides, and then we have Accepta and several other things to look at. So, any questions?
Not in the chat, but here's your time.
Oh, I didn't even turn on that light. Okay. A fun group. Oh, I gotta glue that. That's one. Poor little bitty.
Alrighty. So do you want to pick up kind of here and do
Yep.
the cross compare with asteroides to just wrap that little segment up next time?
Yep. And then we will have some more Callandrena that we didn't have time to get to. And then we'll continue to take wishes from people. I don't know if I have glue. There's glue behind me. All right.
Yep, always
Thanks, everyone.
send us requests. Maybe Eric with that Andrena, while we have yours, we could do a segment. Might not have them all ID'd, but we can show off your Western stuff. So maybe we can chat about when you need those back and when we have them to our best ability. That could be a fun little one-off
Claire,
segment.
what's wrong with this picture?
There's no top on it.
Exactly. There's problems because this other glue bottle has the same problem.
Don't
These are the
know
kinds
how
of issues.
help
These are the
you.
kinds of big issues that we have to deal with.
Mine stays with me. This is why.
Everyone's
But here,
fired.
let's endeavor to solve that problem together. I am stopping the recording now. And everybody